And without further ado, let's get started with craft number 1. We're going to start this craft with one of the foam pumpkins from the Dollar Tree and some yarn that we got at the Dollar Tree. And I'm measuring the yarn out in 18-inch strips. And once we have our first strip of yarn cut, I'm going to go ahead and measure out 11 additional pieces. So we need a total of 12 18-inch pieces of yarn. Once we have everything together, I'll just tie those pieces together with a knot. And for our next step, we're going to tape the yarn down to the table. And I'm taking 4 strands of each into 3 different bunches. And we're going to do a basic braid, and we'll braid that all the way down to the bottom. And once we get the braid complete, we'll just finish with a knot. This is one of my favorite pumpkins to make in the fall. It's fun because you get to make a whole bunch of little braids. I usually make 34 to 35 braids per pumpkin, and it's something you can do while you're just watching TV for a little bit and you just need something to do while you're relaxing that doesn't take much effort at all. And now that our braids are complete, let's move on to the next step. I'm taking a wine cork and some ribbon that I have from the Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to wrap the ribbon around the wine cork. And every few wraps, I'll use a little bit of hot glue just to make sure everything stays into place. And I really like this ribbon from the Dollar Tree. It has like just a little circle that you can cut out. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to cut one of the little circles out, and I just hot glue that right on the top of the wine cork. And this is going to be the stem for our pumpkin. And I just think it adds a lot of character and makes it look so pretty. Now, if you don't want to wrap it with fabric, you could also paint the cork or just leave the cork the way it is. So the Dollar Tree carries a bunch of these different types of foam pumpkins. You might see them in white, black, or orange. And I'm just going to cut a circle out of the top and of the bottom of this foam pumpkin. Now here comes the fun part, putting the pumpkin together. We're going to take all of those braids that you made and we're going to stuff them in the pumpkin on the top and on the bottom. You're welcome to hot glue them if you'd like, but as you can see, once you start putting a bunch of these braids into this pumpkin, it stays in pretty secure. So you don't have to hot glue if you don't want to. When you get to the last few braids, sometimes you need to push the other braids that are around the pumpkin out just so that you can make sure to fit all of the braids in. And the tighter you get them in there, the better. And once you're all done, your pumpkin's gonna look like this. Now I'm going to take my wine cork and insert it into the top part of this pumpkin. Off camera, I made a cute messy bow, and if you haven't made a messy bow before, you're just basically layering 2, 3, 4 pieces of ribbon and you tie them in the center. And I wanted to add a little bit more detail, so I added a raffia bow right to the center of the messy bow, and I'm just going to hot glue that. And it didn't quite stick the first time, so I did have to add a little bit more hot glue, and I used my makeup applicator this time to really press that bow in. And now our pumpkin is complete. I love how this one turned out, and I can't wait to make a whole bunch more for the fall season. For this craft, I'm starting with the Falling Leaves rolling pin from Dollar Tree. And I'm going to remove the raffia bow on the front and the sticker on the back side of this. Then using my zip sander, I just sand off any of the leftover residue of the sticker from the back side of the rolling pin. Now using some painter's tape, I'm going to tape around the rolling pin handles. So once the handles are completely taped off, I grabbed some paint, and this paint was burnt umber, and I believe it was apple barrel paint. And we just coated this until it was covered completely. It did take 3 coats of paint to get this to look the way I wanted it to. can see by just changing the color of the handles, it already gives it a more elevated look. But we're going to take this another step further, and we're going to do something on the back side of this rolling pin. So I'm taking some paper, this is scrapbooking paper, and I'm using a glue stick here, and we're going to glue a piece of scrapbooking paper on the back side of this rolling pin. And I cut the scrapbooking paper slightly bigger than the area of the rolling pin, because what I'm going to do here is I'm using a popsicle stick to smooth everything out. And when everything is dry, I grab my zip sander, and doing a downward motion, I sand the paper off of the rolling pin. So once we're done sanding, it's going to look like this. And we could just stop right here. It already is elevated and looks a lot better than when we bought it, but I want to take it up a level. So I'm going to put this on a paintable surface, and I grabbed a stencil, and this stencil is self-adhesive, and it says Hello Pumpkin. And this comes in a set from Amazon of 6 different stencils. I'll put a link below in the description box. Using Redesign chalk paste in the color Kingdom Moss, I'm going to squeegee over and paint this Hello Pumpkin sign. We could stop here, but you know I'm going to take this another step further. I grabbed some ribbon from the Dollar Tree and I made a bow out of it. And this is a pretty fall ribbon that came out this year with little pumpkins all over it. Next, I'm going to grab some Mod Podge, and I'm just going to use that over the top of this paint to seal everything in. After the Mod Podge dries, I noticed that there's a little paint spot from the Hello Pumpkin stencil. So I decided to take a little piece of hot glue and a cute jute twine bow to cover that up. Now I'm going to flip that over, and I'm going to add an identical bow on the other side of this rolling pin. And now we have a cute reversible rolling pin that you can add to your cheer trays, or you can add to any of your house decor. Moving on to the Give Thanks rolling pin. I really liked how this one looked. I think this was actually my favorite one out of all of the different rolling pins that they had at the Dollar Tree, but I did want to improve it a little bit. So we are going to remove that ribbon and the sticker from the back side of this pen. And if you noticed, I was using my hot tool to help loosen up some of that glue, and that does help a lot with removing some of those items. Next, I'm going to grab my blue painter's tape, and what we're going to do here is just tape around the handles on this rolling pin, because I want to paint the rolling pin handles a different color. And I grabbed burnt umber from Apple Barrel, and I thought the darker color would just give it a richer look. So we're just going to go ahead and paint over the rolling pin handles here. It did take me 3 coats to get a nice coat over the top of these. So I don't want you guys to have to worry about watching that. So with the magic of videos, we'll just have that all done for you in just a moment here. So now that all that paint has dried, we'll just remove the blue painter's tape. And I'm going to flip this Give Thanks over to the back side. And once we do that, we're going to put that on a paintable surface here. And I'm using my Waverly chalk paint in the color Sandstone. And I'm going to do a nice thick coat on the back side of this rolling pin. And this paint covered pretty good, and I only had to do 1 coat. Next, I grab my heat tool and I just give it a quick dry. Now while that is finishing drying, I grab a napkin, and this napkin I did get on Amazon, and I'll put a link in the description box below. I use a small piece of blue painter's tape so that I can separate the top layer off of the napkin. And we're going to decoupage this onto the back side of this rolling pin. So using my Mod Podge in matte, I'm just going to go ahead and paint the back side of this rolling pin. So once all of that Mod Podge has dried, I'm going to grab the napkin and we're just going to position it over the top of the rolling pin. And we're going to find a nice print on the napkin that we like, and then we're going to stop and cut a rectangle out of the napkin about an inch bigger than the actual rolling pin on each side. And once we've done that, we're going to lay that right down on top of the rolling pin, and I just grab a piece of parchment paper and I lay that over the top of the napkin, and using my iron, I just go ahead and iron that napkin right onto the Mod Podge. And that iron heats up that glue. If you haven't tried this before, it's amazing. And the napkin sticks to the rolling pin just perfectly. Next, I grab my zip sander, and if you haven't watched my videos before, it's one of my favorite tools in my toolbox. And I just start sanding in a downward motion. And I like to do this because, you know, I don't always cut a straight line. And if I have the paper a little bit bigger, I just get this nice little edge, and it just fits perfectly by sanding that at the end. And I really like how that looks. And if you notice there, I just had to touch up a little bit of paint on the handles because of the sander, but it looks great. Next, I grab my Mod Podge again and just do a nice top coat over the top of this napkin. And this ribbon's pretty wide. It's a little bit over an inch. And so I decided that I wanted to just cut lengthwise down the ribbon about 9 inches down, and then I just make 2 smaller ribbons. And what I'm going to do here is just make 2 basic bows, and we're going to go ahead and hot glue these onto our rolling pin. And I'm going to put one on one side for give thanks, and then I want to put the other one on the other side of the rolling pin, right about the same spot as the opposite side, just so that way it kind of gives it more of a seamless look. So either way you flip the rolling pin over, it just looks beautiful. This lovely rolling pin is now ready for your tiered tray. So let's take one of these signs from the Dollar Tree and elevate it up a notch. Grab a piece of scrapbook paper that is in your decor style, and let's go ahead and cut them slightly bigger than each one of these signs. And once we have all of our paper cut, I take some Mod Podge and I'm just going to go ahead and paint a nice coat over the top of every one of these signs. And then we're going to set that aside to dry. Next, we'll grab a piece of parchment paper and one of the pieces of scrapbook paper, and we're just going to iron this right on top of the sign. So now that everything is attached, I grab a zip sander, or you can use a sanding block, and we're just going to sand off any of the excess paper around the edges of the sign. And this helps give it a clean look all the way around each edge. Now we're just going to repeat the same step for the next 2 signs. So I want to use this sign outside. It's going to be undercover, but I still want to do an enamel over the top. And this is Rust-Oleum's clear enamel. And I'm just going to go ahead and spray this first before I attach any letters. And once I've attached the letters, I will do another coat. So I got these wood letters at Walmart, and it's a package of 36, and so I just laid them all out and came up with some different letters and words for the fall season. And once I figured out my 3 words that I wanted to place on the sign, I went ahead and used some apple barrel paint in light mocha to paint all my letters. So once all the letters have dried, I placed them on my sign to space everything out. And to glue them onto the sign, I'm going to use some wood glue that I did get from the Dollar Tree. I found that this wood glue works just as well as any wood glue you'd buy at the Home Depot or Lowe's. So I've been just going with this glue, and it's been doing great. And I just put a few dots on each one of the letters, and I just placed them back on the sign. And it did take about an hour or 2 for it to dry. It says it needs a little bit longer, but it was dry to the touch within an hour. So I felt like the sign needed just a little touch of something. So I added a little raffia bow up in the fall corner. Last, I did do a coat of the sealer again, the Rust-Oleum enamel. And once everything was dry, we were able to put this sign out in our flower pot. So for this craft, I'm going to use 4 dice that I did get at the Dollar Tree. And I know you've probably seen a few other videos like this before, but I'm hoping I'm doing a new twist on it that will help inspire you to do something different. So what I like about these foam blocks is that you get 4 for $1.25, so that's a great value. It's also very easy to paint. So I did paint these with sandstone from Waverly. It did take 3 coats to cover all of those dots. So in the future, I may need to start priming these ahead of time, maybe use with a spray primer or something, just so that it doesn't take so many coats of paint. But it wasn't so bad watching my Hallmark and painting these over 3 times. So next I grabbed some stamps. These are some scrapbooking stamps that I had from Stampin' Up. And I'm just going to take the black ink and a piece of tissue paper, and I'm going to write out the word fall using the ink pad. And I'm spreading out the letters so that I can cut each letter out individually. So you'll notice that I'm not necessarily putting them in the order of the word. And I did do a few extra letters just in case something went wrong, since I was doing all of this now and I wanted to clean up my stamps. So once all my letters are placed onto this piece of tissue paper, I grab a small glass of water and a paintbrush. And I'm going to take my paintbrush and I'm going to paint the water around each one of these letters in an oval shape. And we're just going to tear around each one of these letters until each letter is cut out. So I had this beautiful leaf print paper in my stash, and I took it and cut out 4 squares for each one of my cubes using my trimmer. And now I grab 4 half wood beads and I paint them with my Waverly Truffle paint. And now that everything's dry, let's put everything together. Let's grab our 4 blocks, and I'm just positioning them so they look like they're the same way. Even though they're a cube, sometimes you need to flip them around and make sure that you like how they look. And I'm going to take some of my Mod Podge here, and I'm just going to go ahead and Mod Podge on the little pieces of paper onto each one of these cubes. So with the fall season right around the corner, I'd love to hear about what your favorite thing is with the fall. Please share in the comments below. After I position the blocks in a way I would like them to be arranged, I take the little letters that we did earlier with the tissue paper, and we're going to use the Mod Podge and paint over the top of the scrapbooking paper that's on the cube. And then we will add the little letters on top of that. So next you'll see me add the F onto the first one here. And we just let that down really nice and gently. And then you take the Mod Podge and you just kind of paint over the top. And with the tissue paper being so opaque, it just fades right into the scrapbooking paper. And once all of these letters are attached, we're going to set these aside to dry. So let's grab some berry garland that we have from the Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to cut them about 2 inches in length, leaving one set of berries on them. And I'm just twisting them around a piece of a skewer, and we're just making a little curly Q that we're going to add on to the top of each one of these different blocks. Oh, here's the fun part, putting everything together. I'm taking some Spanish moss and some hot glue, and I'm going to start by putting a little bit of Spanish moss on top of each of these blocks. I'm then going to hot glue one of those little half beads that we painted earlier. We'll add one of those curly Qs, and we can stick that straight into the foam of the block. And you can use a little bit of hot glue to make sure it stays into place, but it sticks into the block pretty well with that wire. And I'm just going to repeat that step on all of the blocks, putting the moss, a little half bead, and then that little curly Q on each one of them. And now these beautiful shelf sitters are all ready to be displayed. So canning jar shelf sitters that you find at the Dollar Tree for most seasons are a great item to add to any farmhouse decor. You just need to maybe elevate it a little bit and make it more of your own. So that's what I'm going to do here. We're going to remove as many of the pieces off of this jar that we can. And to get some of that paper off, I use a wet paper towel, and I actually scrape most of this off using my scraper tool from Cricut. Then I'm going to use my zip sander and just sand off any excess. At first I thought I was going to paint this, which is why I removed like everything. But after doing all of that, I decided I wanted to put some scrapbooking paper over the top of this canning jar. So we cut out a piece of scrapbooking paper slightly bigger than the jar itself. To attach this paper to the jar, I'm going to use a glue stick, and we're just going to glue that right over the top of the whole entire jar. We then lay the piece of scrapbook paper right over the top, and I'm going to use a popsicle stick just to smooth out that piece of paper onto the jar. And we're going to set that aside to dry. And once everything is dry, we're going to grab our zip sander here or a sanding block, and we're just going to sand in a downward motion to remove all of the excess paper. So I'm going to grab a silkscreen stencil. These stencils I did get on Amazon, and they came in a 6-pack, and they were all fall themed, and they're really cute. I'll put a link in the description box below. And I'm going to use my chalk paste, and I decided to go with Desert Rose. It's like a lighter pink color. And using our squeegee, we'll just paint over this whole stencil. If you haven't used these stencils before, these are great. They're self-adhesive, and you can wash them with warm water and reuse them again later on. Now let's go ahead and put together our little jar. I'm going to reattach the silver piece at the top of the jar here. Then using hot glue, I'll also reattach the cute leaf that came with the jar and a nice bow on top. For the final finishing touches, I did a jute twine bow to cover up a little mistake with the paint right over by the home. I love how this jar turned out. I can't wait to display it with my fall decor. For this craft, I used a wood spoon that I got at the thrift store, and I'm going to go ahead and use my painter's tape here. We're just going to tape the top part of the spoon off. And once everything is ready, we'll grab our Waverly paint in the color Moss. We'll paint the top part of the spoon. I am painting both the front and the back side of the spoon, and it did take 2 coats to cover completely. And once the moss paint is dry, I grabbed my Apple Barrel Burnt Umber paint, and I tried to paint some little lines to make it look like a pumpkin, and it didn't quite turn out the way I wanted. So once those dried, I did grab some of my sandstone paint from Waverly, and I went over the top just lightly like a whitewash, and then I went back and added a little more moss, a little bit more burnt umber. Just kept doing that until I liked the way it looked. Once that was completely dry, I removed the tape, and we're going to make the top part a little pumpkin. So I grabbed a stick and I just cut that down to size, and we're going to glue that right on the top of the spoon with hot glue. And using some Spanish moss, we're going to go around the stem of that pumpkin, and this will help keep it in place. It'll kind of hold it there, and we just push that all the way around. And then if you don't like that much moss on there, you can always give it a little haircut with your scissors. Once the hot glue is set, I grabbed some of this beautiful ribbon, and I got this ribbon at Walmart. I'm not able to find a link online yet for it, so I would check your Walmart store. It was $4.44, It was in the ribbon section, and I really liked how this ribbon turns out. It's just very rustic and it's very fall to me, so I've been using it a lot in my fall designs. And now this pumpkin wood spoon is ready to display. I'm gonna add it to one of my little potted plants at home in the house, just to give it a little bit of fall. So I'm gonna start with this hello sign that I did get at the Dollar Tree, and we're just going to remove all of the tags. And next, I'm going to put this on a paintable surface. I'm using my antique wax from Waverly, and we're just going to paint a nice coat of wax all over the top side of this hello sign. And using a baby wiper paper towel, you can just remove some of that wax until it looks like it's nice and stained. And once that's dried, I grab my Waverly paint in the color Plaster, and I'm just going to do a light coat of paint over the top of the stain. Don't worry if it's not perfect. You don't want it to be perfect. You want it to look a little bit rustic. Next, I'm going to grab my Waverly paint in the color Truffle, and I'm just going to dry brush a little bit over the top of that plaster paint. So while the hello sign is drying, I grabbed these half beads that I got at Amazon, and I'm going to paint a few of them. And I had a wonderful viewer last month named Dory that suggested that I try this. And basically what I'm doing here is I'm using a piece of painter's tape, and I'm just taping it to a board with the sticky side up. And this allows for us to add the beads to the sticky side, keeping them in place so that we're able to paint them without them moving around. So Dory, thank you so much for that helpful tip. I really appreciate it. Now to paint these beads, I'm going to use my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster again, and I'm just going to do a single coat over the top of every one of these beads. So for this next step, I have this cute flower pick that I got at the Dollar Tree, and you only need one of these because we're going to take it apart by deconstructing it using our little pliers, and we're going to tape these together using some floral tape to make a little swag to go on our sign. So I'm going to let the video show how I'm doing this. If you have any questions, please leave a comment below. So now that we have a swag, we need to be able to attach this to our sign. So I'm using a small piece of ribbon from the Dollar Tree. You can use any ribbon you'd like. And I'm just going to attach that right to the center of those two flowers there using some hot glue. And this is going to give us an extra surface for us to be able to attach this to the top of our sign. I kind of feel like a chef here. We have all of our little pieces all ready to go to put together onto our sign. So to start, I want to attach the hello to the center of this sign. And to do this, I'm using my Dollar Tree wood glue and a little bit of hot glue. And this will allow the wood glue time to set by using that hot glue as well. And next, we want to attach the swag to the top of the sign. And it is a little bit stiff, so I'm going to have to glue it in two different spots. We're going to glue right where we bended the wire onto the top center part of that white rim of the sign there. And I'm going to attach that with one of my pink large clips from Dollar Tree. And this will just allow it some time to adhere. Waiting for the glue to dry, I'm going to grab my hot glue and start adding some of these cute little half beads. And I wanted to start by covering up the 3 seams that were on the rim of this sign. I did not like seeing those, and this covers them up completely. And then once I've done that, I'm just going to go ahead and space these beads out evenly. And with the lines in the center of the sign, it makes it really simple. So we're just matching those up with the lines. And then we just add an extra bead in between the bottom line and the center bead. Let's go ahead and flip the sign over. And remember that piece of ribbon that we attached? We're going to take that ribbon and fold it over to the back side of the sign and then just hot glue that. And wow, I love how this sign turns out. It's neutral and could go with any decor. This adorable canvas easel set that I found at the Dollar Tree is the center for our sign. We're going to start by putting this on a paintable surface. Next, I grabbed one of these fun stencils that I did get at Amazon, and I'm just going to quickly defuzz that stencil. Now we're going to center that stencil straight onto that piece of canvas. And we're going to use our chalk paste with this stencil. I'm going to start with 3 colors, and I use the redesigned chalk paste. I'm going to use Antique Moss, Desert Rose, and Vintage Lace. And to apply the chalk paste, I use a squeegee. I'm going to start by doing the stems first in the moss color. And we're going to use the Desert Rose for the pumpkins and the Vintage Lace for the words. Now that that's complete, let's reveal the sign. And once our sign is dry, I'm going to add this canvas back to the easel. And looking at it, I'm like, I think that we could do a tiny bit more. So next, I'm going to add a checkered bow to the bottom of this sign. And I really love how this sign turned out. I think the black canvas makes everything stand out so pretty. For this craft, we're going to start out with this sign from the Dollar Tree. We're going to just elevate it a level. So this is really easy. We're just going to remove this checkered bow, and you can save that for a future craft. Next, we're going to remove any extra glue that is on the top of this sign. Now I wanted this sign to match more of my other decor in the house, and I've been using this ribbon that I got at Walmart, and we're going to add that to the top of this sign. Next, we're going to grab one of these burlap flowers that I got at the Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to hot glue that right to the center of this ribbon. Now our mini makeover is complete. On to the next craft. We're going to flip this sign over, and I'm using some scrapbooking paper, and I'm just going to cut out a square that will fit on the inside square on the back side. And once we have that trimmed so everything fits in nicely, I'm going to use a glue stick, and we're just going to glue that piece of paper on the inside of this square. And if you're still watching, please leave a pumpkin emoji down below. To ensure everything is smooth on the bottom there, I'm using a Cricut tool here, and we're just going to smooth out any of the wrinkles in the paper. Next, I'm going to grab one of these wood planks from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to take this and put this on a paintable surface. And using antique Waverly wax, we're going to just paint over this square. Then using a paper towel, I'm just going to blend in the wax, and we're just going to make sure this is stained all around on both sides, just in case we see that back side. Now, using that same stencil set that I got at Amazon, I'm using the Hello Fall stencil, and we're just going to place that on top of our square. And once we've done that, I'm going to use chalk paste in Vintage White, and we're just going to do a quick squeegee over the top of this stencil. And now we're going to carefully remove the stencil to reveal the beautiful sign. And once this is dry, I'm going to use my finishing wax. I used Jolene's finishing wax, and I'm just going to wipe that over the top there with a lint-free cloth just to seal everything in. Now we'll set that aside to dry, and while that's drying, I'm going to grab the original piece and we're going to add some little blocks to the center of this sign. I'm using 2 of the tumbling blocks from the Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to adhere them using some hot glue. Next, I'm going to grab some wood glue and some hot glue, and I'm going to add that to the top of these tumbling blocks. Then we will add the sign on top of those tumbling blocks, so it gives it a nice raised look. And while that is drying, I'm going to add an embellishment to the top of this sign. I really like these burlap flowers from the Dollar Tree, and I've been buying them in all the different shapes that they have. And we're just going to add a different burlap flower to the top of that sign. So each side has a different flower on it, and they look completely different. So it's a fun reversible sign for the fall. For this craft, I'm starting with this sign that I got at the Dollar Tree, and we're going to remove the nautical piece on the front. And I'm just going to scrape that off and sand that down with my zip sander. Now we have a great blank slate to start our craft. I'm going to start out by using my Waverly Antique Wax, and we're going to stain the wood on the front side of this sign. And if you haven't done this before, you just paint the front using the wax, and then once you have painted the front, you just wipe it down with a paper towel or a baby wipe. Now I'm going to grab my Waverly paint in the color Plaster, and I'm going to whitewash over the top of the stain. Now for this next step, I'm going to use 10 of these wood biscuits, and I did get these on Amazon, but you can get them at Home Depot or Lowe's, and they're a size 0, and I'm just going to paint them with my yellow chalk paint from Waverly. And when I started painting them, they started moving all over the piece of cardboard. So I took a piece of painter's tape and I just laid that down, and I'm just going to place those little biscuits on top of the painter's tape, which will make it so easy to paint these. And we're not going to be painting the back side of these, so just worry about getting the front side and around the outside corners, because you'll still see those a little bit. I'm curious if any of you have used these wood biscuits in your crafts. If you have, leave me a comment below and let me know how you guys have used them. While these are drying, I'm grabbing another paintable surface, and I added a little piece of tape, and this is just a small circle round that I got in a package from Amazon. And I'm going to paint this brown with burnt umber paint from Apple Barrel, and this will be the center of our sunflower. Next, I'm going to take some of that same burnt barrel paint, and I'm going to just dry brush around the edges of our little petals. Now I'm going to set this all up ahead of time before I glue anything down, because I want to make sure I get the flower just right onto this surface. So you can see me here just laying all the pieces around, and it does take a little bit to get them where you want them to be. And once you're happy with your flower, I'm taking some wood glue, and this glue I did get at Dollar Tree, and I'm going to do a few petals at a time. And I'm just going to put the glue down and then place the petals back to where I want them onto the surface. And you might notice there that I'm using a little bit of hot glue after I've put the wood glue on, just to help them stick quicker so that way the wood glue has time to set. And once you have everything glued into place, you'll have this beautiful sunflower sign that's all ready to hang. So this is one of my favorite crafts from the video. It's really basic, but it's something that could be really fun to do with a group of people. If you get these cute little ceramic discs from the Dollar Tree, and then you can have all your guests bring different kinds of napkins, and you guys could do a napkin exchange and Mod Podge your napkins onto these cute discs. It would be so much fun. So back to the craft. So all I did here was remove the string from this cute little disc, and now I'm taking my napkin and I'm going to take a little piece of blue painter's tape to remove the backing on this napkin. Now I'm just going to trim the napkin up just to make it a little bit easier to work with, and then I'll set that aside. Now we're going to grab some Mod Podge, and I'm going to paint a nice layer of Mod Podge over the top of this disc. And once all of the Mod Podge has dried, we'll take the napkin and we're just going to center it onto the disc. Now I'm going to grab a piece of parchment paper and lay that over the top of the napkin. And using my iron, I'm just going to iron this napkin right onto the disc. Now I'm going to grab my handy dandy zip sander, and we're just going to sand in a downward motion all the way around the disc. And I'm using the back side of a paintbrush just to poke the holes back into the disc. And to seal this disc, I wanted to use triple thick because it gives a nice glossy coat on the top. And I'm just going to paint that over the top of the whole entire project. For the hanger on this, I'm going to use a ribbon in the color green just to kind of match up with the napkin. And I'm just going to tie a nice knot at the top. And for my final embellishment, I'll add a quick raffia bow right to the center. Now this project is complete. This is a fun, happy sign you're ready to hang. And as I said earlier, I really think this is a wonderful project for a group setting. This craft, we're going to start with a white candle from the Dollar Tree. I'm using an egg carton as an extra set of hands here, just to help hold everything in place. Next, we're going to take the top layer of a napkin, and we're going to just paint the napkin straight onto this candlestick. What I've found with these napkins and this candle is it takes about 3 different turns to get the whole entire thing covered with the Mod Podge. So I'll start with one side, and I will cover everything with the Mod Podge on that one side and set it aside for a half an hour to dry. And then I will flip the candle over and do the next third of the candle, and then I'll do the same thing a half an hour later on the last. On the last turn here, I do have to trim some of the napkin off of this candle, and we're just going to let that overlap just a little bit on the side. It'll be a small seam, but you won't really see it once you've laid down that Mod Podge. One thing I like about doing the Mod Podge in this technique is it gives the candle a different look. It's more of a rough and crinkly look instead of that smooth texture that we get when we iron down the Mod Podge. For the top of the candlestick, I did trim a lot of the napkin off, but I do Mod Podge down the rest along the top rim of the candle. And here's what it looks like when it's all dry. I did think that it needed a little extra, so I added a nice little and I'm going to dry brush the inside of this sign with some Waverly chalk paint in the color white. So first I'll go ahead and tape this off so it'll make it a little bit easier because we don't want to get any of that white paint on the yellow. And now that our dry brushing is done, we'll go ahead and remove the painter's tape and set that aside to dry. And while that's drying, we'll use our paintable surface and lay down this Farm Fresh sign. And using my Waverly chalk paint in the color Maize, I'm going to paint this little Farm Fresh sign. And I believe I got this Farm Fresh sign from the Dollar Tree in a little pack during the fall season last year. And once that paint has dried, I'm going to add a tiny bit of antique wax from Waverly, and we're just going to do that to just match up the Farm Fresh sign to the frame of this picture. Now for the last step, let's just hot glue and put all of this together. So we're going to put the cow a little bit over center and then the Farm Fresh sign. And then I got these adorable little flowers off of Temu, and I'm going to add those as well just for some fun embellishments. And I just love how this sunflower happy cow turns out. It is so adorable. For this craft, I'm going to start out with a fabric square that I got at the Dollar Tree. And it's this lovely fabric with all these beautiful sunflowers on it. And I'm going to start by just laying the fabric out and just looking at where I want to make my cuts. And I decided just to cut right on the fold. And I'm just going to cut straight down and make a nice little shape of a rectangle. And what I love about this craft is that you can take any piece of fabric, fabric square, scrap fabric, and cut out a rectangle. And once you have your rectangle, you can go ahead and start making these cute pumpkins. First pumpkin here is 8 by 10, but you can make any size rectangle that you want. Next, we lay this piece of fabric face up, and using our hot glue gun, we're just going to place a line of hot glue along the bottom and fold over the piece of fabric. And then we're going to attach the ends of that fabric with more hot glue. We'll flip this piece of fabric inside out and make a little pillowcase. And once we have our pillowcase, I'm going to grab some polyfill, and I'm just going to stuff the pillowcase with the polyfill. You could also use an old pillow and use the stuffing from that as well if you don't have the polyfill. Now for the top of this pumpkin, I'm going to take a needle and thread, and I'm just going to do a basic gather stitch along the top. And if you haven't done one of these before, it's really simple. You just go ahead and you stick the needle through the fabric, and then you gather the fabric and stick the needle through the gathers. And you just do enough to fit on the needle, and then you pull the string through, and then you repeat that until you get all the way around the top. And once you get all the way around the top, you should be able to lightly pull the string, and it gathers all of that together like a drawstring and closes up your pumpkin. Now once you finish stitching around the top of the pumpkin and you've pulled the string tight, I just do a quick knot using my needle there, and I just knot the string so that way everything stays nice and tight. Now for the next step, you can continue using the same string that you were using before to tie these knots, but I decided I wanted to use some twine just to give it a little bit more of a rustic look. And I just tied one piece of twine all the way around the pumpkin and then tied it tight. Next, I tied a second string around the pumpkin again, and this time I tied it around 2 times, making an X at the bottom and then tying again at the top. And this gives it 6 pleats in the pumpkin, and I feel that gives it more of a pumpkin look. And I just kind of rearrange these strings to make it look the way I want to. Now I grab a wine cork, and this one I had used for a previous craft, so I'd already cut the tip of the wine cork off, and I liked the rustic look that it had on it. So I just glued down the wine cork into the center of the pumpkin there, and I just kind of pushed open the pumpkin a little bit to get that wine cork in there to make the stem. In the past, I've also taken those wine corks and I've wrapped them with fabric, or I've painted them. But I find that the wine cork, the shape of it is just perfect for the stems on these fabric pumpkins. Next, I cut some of that twine off and I made a quick little bow, and I'm gonna add an extra raffia bow over the top of that just to give it more bow finesse, and that big pumpkin is done. And then for the second pumpkin here, I used a smaller piece of the fabric and I wanted to make a mini pumpkin, and you can do the same thing. And this just gives you a nice close-up of our stitching in case you were wondering how to do the stitch, and that's a gather stitch. And once you get these pumpkins down, you'll get addicted. You'll just start making pumpkin after pumpkin. These pumpkins can go anywhere for your fall decor. I like putting them in a big basket on a table. For this craft, I'm going to start with a wood leaf that I got at the Dollar Tree. And I just love how it has 2 different layers of wood on this leaf. After removing the raffia bow from the leaf, I'm going to put the leaf on a paintable surface. And I grab my Waverly chalk paint in the color Moss. And we're going to paint the outside layer of this wood leaf. So while we finish painting this leaf, I'd love to hear where you're watching from. I'm from the Pacific Northwest in Washington State. Once we finish painting all of that green paint, we're going to let that dry. And now we're going to take our white Waverly chalk paint and just paint the top leaf with 1 coat of white paint. And once the white paint has dried, I grab my Mod Podge and paint another coat, and we're going to let that completely dry. So I grabbed this paper napkin, and I got this on Amazon, and I'll put the link in the description box below. But it's one of my favorite fall napkins that I've found because it has the colors I like in my house, the blue and the green and the off-white. And I feel like it's very farmhouse and very rustic. And I'm just going to go ahead and layer that top layer of the napkin over the top of the leaf. And I'm just going to cut a rough square that will fit over the top of the leaf, and we're not going to really worry about the overhang of the napkin, because once we attach the napkin, we're going to burn the extra overhang off of the leaf. Right now I'm just trying to position the napkin so that I can get as much of the flowers over the white part of the leaf. Next, I'm going to put a piece of parchment paper over the top and iron that napkin straight on with the Mod Podge. Now let's grab our lighter and light the napkin. And it's amazing. It just burns that napkin straight off, and it stops right on the white part of the leaf, which is great. And there's a little bit of burn marks, but it just makes it look more rustic, and I like that look that it gives. It kind of gives it a rough look. And once you're satisfied with your edges that you've burnt off, you go ahead and just wipe down any of the extra soot off of your craft, and it may leave a few marks, but it just gives it more of a rustic look, and I'm just going to leave mine that way. Next, I grab a piece of twine, and I'm going to go ahead and hot glue that to the back of the leaf so I have a way of hanging the leaf. Next, we grab the raffia bow that was previously on this leaf, and I did use a little bit of my brown burnt umber paint, and I dry brushed the front of the bow just to give it a more rustic look. And I'm just going to attach that right on the bottom of the leaf to cover the hole that was there. And now our project is complete. I love how this turned out. Let me know what you think in the comments below. To start this craft, we're going to use a wood sign from the Dollar Tree, and we're going to paint this with some Waverly chalk paint in the color white. And I'm doing a light coat over the top of this sign. It doesn't need to be perfect. I want it to be a little bit more rustic, but I do want to get most of the wood covered with the white paint. And once the paint has dried, I'm going to grab some Mod Podge, and I'm just going to paint that Mod Podge on the top of these wood strips in the front of the sign. Then we're going to set this aside to dry. Next, I'm going to grab some tissue paper. I was hoping to use the gold tissue paper, but that didn't work out. So we're going with the white tissue paper. And I'm using a brown like a chocolate colored brown ink, and I'm going to spell out the words, "Oh Autumn, please do not leave me." I'm going to cut the words out in strips in that tissue paper, and it's okay if the tissue paper is slightly bigger than the strip of wood on the sign, because we can always sand that down here after we attach everything. So I'm going to lay that down nice and neat, and then we're going to add a piece of parchment paper over the top of the tissue paper, and we're going to use our hot iron and just iron that tissue paper right onto the sign. And then we'll lift that piece of parchment paper off, and then we're going to repeat for the remaining words in the sign. These 3 rows of words, I did do all of them at the same time underneath that piece of parchment paper, and it worked just fine. So I grabbed my zip sander, and I'm just going to quickly sand any of the extra tissue paper that was extra on top of the sign, and it comes off really simple. So don't be afraid to do this. It actually works out really well. And these zip sanders work great in getting in between all of those pieces of wood. If you're interested in what the zip sander looks like, you can go ahead and look in the description box below, and there's a link to the Amazon site, so if you wanted to check what those look like. Now, for this next step here, I'm just taking some Mod Podge and I'm going over the top of the tissue paper to seal everything in. And once everything is sealed in and dry, I put a little bit of the truffle paint on a paper towel there, and I'm just going to dry brush over the top of all of the words, just a little bit of paint. And I got a little extra paint on there that I didn't want, so I used a baby wipe and just kind of wiped or smeared that around in there. And it gave it a really nice look, and I liked how that turned out. It was very rustic. So now I'm just going to set this aside for a little bit, and we're going to paint one of these wood ornaments from the Dollar Tree, and this is a maple leaf. To paint this leaf, I'm going to use my Waverly chalk paint in the color Moss. And I'm doing a nice thick coat over the whole entire top layer. And once that dries, I did do a second coat just to make sure it was the color I wanted. And then I'm going to take a dry brush and I'm going to do a tiny bit of dry brushing with the truffle paint as well. And this just gives it a dirtier, rustic look. In keeping with the rustic look, I grab a raffia bow and I'm going to just go ahead and do a little bit of dry brushing on that bow as well, just to age the bow a little. Now I'm going to put my sign together. So I'm going to take my leaf and I'm going to position it onto the sign here. And I'm going to grab a pencil real quick and I'm going to mark underneath the leaf where I want the hot glue, just because sometimes I get the hot glue in the wrong spot. So I want to make sure I put it in the right spot so we don't see any of that hot glue. And once that's glued down, I'm going to glue down that little bow to cover up the hole in the ornament there. I'm really happy with how this craft turned out. It's very rustic, and I can't wait to hang this with my new fall decor. So you might have seen this leaf at the Dollar Tree, and that is where I got this maple leaf. And I loved how the front of this leaf turned out, and I didn't want to change the front of the leaf. So we're going to make this a 2-sided sign. So we're going to keep the front just the way it was and remove the stickers from the back of the sign. And off camera, I did sand this down just slightly. Now I'm going to put this leaf on a paintable surface, and I grab my Waverly chalk paint in the color white. We're going to do a nice coat of chalk paint over the back side of this leaf. Now I really want this white to stick out, so I did do 2 coats of white paint. And once everything is dried, I did put this back on a paintable surface, and we're going to grab a checkered silk screen stencil. And I did get this on Amazon, and I'm going to go ahead and peel that stencil off of the piece of paper it came on, and I defuzzed that a little bit on a microfiber cloth. Next, I'm just going to place the stencil over the top of our leaf here, and I'm using my chalk paste in the color Kingdom Moss, and we're going to just squeegee that paint over the top of the leaf. Then we're going to carefully remove the stencil. And now that everything is removed, I just take my heat tool and I just help assist in the drying time since I'd like to move on to the next step. Next, I grab these adorable burlap flowers that I got at the Dollar Tree that they brought back for fall. And I don't know if they had these before in the spring, this style, but I really like how this looks. And I'm just going to hot glue that to the center of our leaf. And that is it. It's a simple little craft. It looks amazing. And now we can place this on a tiered tray or in any shelf decor. So this is a fun, easy craft that you can make. And I'm starting out with some pumpkins that were part of some different picks that I had from the Dollar Tree. And I just took them out of the picks and I glued them together. And for our next step, I'm going to use raffia, but you could also use any like stuffing for like baskets or different things like that. Anything that kind of has a shredded look to it you could use. And I'm going to glue that onto the top pumpkin here. So I'm just going to use a little bit of hot glue, and be careful, don't burn yourself. It does hurt when you do that. I did use my little toothpick thing there to help push everything down. And then after I'm done gluing all of that on there, we're going to just set this aside and let it dry for a few minutes. Now I found these adorable Scarecrow hats at the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to use one of them and glue that right on top of the raffia there and on the top of those pumpkins. And we got now a cute little Scarecrow pumpkin. And next I'm going to make the face for this pumpkin. And so I'm using the back side of a paintbrush, and I'm just going to test it out on a little piece of cardboard there, just till I get the dots the way I want them to be before I put them on my pumpkin. And next we'll just do our little eyes there, and that's with a black acrylic paint. I believe that was either Folk Art or Apple Barrel. And for the nose, I'm going to use the orange from Waverly Chalk Paint, and I'm just using an angle brush and making it look kind of like a carrot. And then we'll take that same angle brush and I'm just going to draw a little smiley face on the pumpkin. And I felt like the pumpkin needed some rosy cheeks, so I used a Q-tip and some pink Folk Art paint, and I just did cute little cheeks on that pumpkin. Next, I'm going to just tie up a little bit more of that raffia in a little bundle. And I'm taking a piece of scrap fabric and I'm just tying it around the pumpkin's head. And then I'm going to tie that raffia right inside of it just to make it look more like some straw sticking out of the Scarecrow. So now that our little pumpkin snowman Scarecrow is complete, we're going to take a skewer and I'm going to insert that into the bottom pumpkin. And this will make it easy for you to display either in a vase of flowers or in a pot of flowers. I found these adorable napkins at Walmart the other day, and they're part of the Pioneer Women's collection, and I think they're just so sweet. So we're going to use those in our craft today. So we're starting out with this plaque that I got at the Dollar Tree, and I'm using my Waverly Chalk Paint in the color Plaster, and I'm going to paint a nice coat of paint over the front of this plaque. So I got a set of stencils from Amazon, and there were 6 harvest type stencils in the package, and this was one of the last ones I hadn't used yet, so I decided to use this on this sign. For this, I'm using chalk paste by Redesign, and I'm using cranberry, kingdom moss, and antique sage. The antique sage is what I'm doing for the pumpkin, the moss is what I'm using for the leaf, and the cranberry is what I'm going to use for the happy harvest. And I felt like these colors really tied in with the napkin that I showed you earlier. And now let's pull the stencil off and see the pretty design. And while the sign is drying for a moment, I'm going to grab the napkin that we saw earlier, and I'm just going to take the top layer off of the napkin. And to start, I'm going to cut out 1 square out of the napkin, the little truck, and then I'm going to cut the flowers out as well, and I used 2 of the squares of the flowers, but I kept them connected. Next, I'm going to use a paintbrush and some water, and I'm just going to kind of paint the water around the outside of the napkin and then pull off any excess. And it gives us this torn look that I really think is going to look nice when we decoupage this onto our sign. So now grab some Mod Podge, and we're going to paint some Mod Podge along the bottom of the sign and on the other half of the sign on the other side of Happy Harvest. And once we get all of that painted on, we're going to let that dry. And now that everything is dry, we're going to set our napkins on top of the sign, and then using some parchment paper over the top of that, I'm going to use a hot iron and iron that piece of napkin right onto that Mod Podge. Now be a little bit careful. I did use the heat a little bit higher than where the napkin was, so the Mod Podge got a little warm and stuck to the parchment paper, but it was all right. It peeled right off, and I had no problem adding the truck napkin right over the top and using the parchment paper and the iron again, ironing that truck onto the sign. Now that everything is ironed on, I grab my zip sander, and I'm just going to go ahead and sand off any excess napkin so that we can see the pretty sign and the design that's on it. And for our next step, we're going to seal everything in, and I'm just going to paint a thin layer of Mod Podge over the top of the napkin, and I ended up going over the top of the chalk paste as well because I felt, well, let's just seal the whole entire sign in, and it worked out beautifully. Now once everything has been painted with the Mod Podge and it's completely dry, I'm going to add a ribbon so that we have a way of hanging the sign. And I found this really pretty turquoise ribbon in my stash, and I'm just going to hot glue that onto the back side of the sign. And once both ribbons are hot glued, you can just tie the top in a little knot or a bow, whatever you would like, so that'd be easy for you to hang. And here is our little hanger. I love how it turned out. And a quick thank you to my friend for inspiring me to make this one. So now we're on to making some fall tags, and I'm using these fun ornaments that I got at the Dollar Tree, and they look like little hot cocoa mugs or maybe a coffee mug or mocha mug. And I'm going to start out by painting both sides of it with Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. And once the paint has dried, I'm going to go ahead and grab my Mod Podge, and we're going to paint both sides of this ornament, only on the bottom part of the ornament. So we don't want to paint where the whipped cream would be on the hot cocoa mug, just the mug portion of it. So let that dry on one side, then flip it over and do the same thing and paint with some Mod Podge. And while that's drying, I'm going to grab my napkin, and this I did get at the Dollar Tree. I just really like the plaid on it, and I thought this would work really nice on these tags. And I'm just going to lay that out and then iron that right on top of our mug. And I'm using some parchment paper to go over the top of the napkin, and just an iron like you would for ironing your clothes. It works out great. And that iron just warms the Mod Podge up and allows the napkin to stick to that tag. And I'll just trim any excess napkin off of the tag, and using my zip sander, or you could use a sanding block, you can sand off any of the excess napkin. And for that part right inside the mug there, I'm just using an X-Acto knife and a cutting board to get that piece of the napkin off of our tag. And the next step is just repeating exactly what you did on the opposite side of the tag. Now I placed the tag back on the front side, and from here we're going to try to put some of this lightweight spackle on the top where the foam of the coffee would be or the whipped cream would be. So I totally failed at this. I tried using a Wilton tip size 21, and it just would not squirt out through the tip. And then I tried to make it liquidy, and it didn't work that way. So eventually I just used it like Play-Doh, and I put it on the top of my little cup there, and it still looks good, and it's not dry yet or anything, so I'm going to sprinkle some snow on top and make it look all fancy. And once it dried, it looked just fine. Next, I'm going to grab some rub-on transfers from the Dollar Tree, and these are gold, and I'm just going to put a monogram of the person's initial that's going to be sitting at that spot for Thanksgiving on the little cup here. And then I'm just going to add a gold ribbon here. We're just going to tie that right on the handle and make a nice little loop. And I just tie a quick knot and a little bow. And this will make a wonderful tag for Thanksgiving. And then they can take it home as a gift and put it on their Christmas tree. So this is a fun leaf wreath. And while most of my crafts are beginner friendly, I would say that this one is a little bit more advanced, and it does take about 2 hours to complete. But if you're patient, I think that you will like the results. So I'm starting out using a thicker twine, and I'm going to wrap the outside perimeter of the leaf. And I'm wrapping the twine around the outside of the leaf and then using a tiny bit of hot glue to secure it about every 5 to 10 wraps. And once you wrap the whole outside perimeter of the leaf, I grab a stack of zip ties, and I use the clear zip ties from the Dollar Tree. And this ribbon I got from Walmart, and this was one of their fall ribbons. I believe it was like $4.99 a roll, and I really just liked the texture on it, and I thought that that would be really nice for the leaf. And what I'm doing here is I'm securing the ribbon with one of the zip ties to the inside like lines or the veins of the leaf, and then we're gonna take the ribbon and I'm just bunching it up into a bunch of like 3 little gathers, and then I'm gonna take a zip tie and I'm gonna put that through those ribbons and zip tie it to the back side of the wreath. And I'm just gonna keep repeating that step until I get to the end of each vein, and then I'll cut the ribbon and start again on a new vein. So I'm gonna take and do 3 gathers, zip tie it together, fluff the bow out, and then zip tie that all on. And once I get a few zip ties on there, I just flip the wreath over again and I just cut the extra strings of the zip ties off until I do the whole entire leaf. And if I videotaped this, this would have been a 2-hour video, so we're just gonna speed this along and you'll see what the finished product looks like. Once we have all the ribbons attached to the wreath, I just fluff the ribbons out to just give it more of a leaf look. Next, we're gonna go ahead and make a bow for the top of our leaf. And I'm taking this ribbon that I did get from the Dollar Tree, and it's about a 2-inch thick ribbon. And I'm making my loops, and so I'm holding it from the center and I'm making a loop on either side. So there'll be a total of 6 loops, 3 on each side with 2 little tails. And you squish that right in the center, and then you can take a pipe cleaner here and you can just wrap that around a few times and just cinch that together. And once you have that done, I go ahead and I cut the ribbon off of the roll of ribbon, and I just do that so I can save some of the ribbon and I'm not wasting any ribbon. So I kind of wait to make sure I have the bow exactly how I want, so I waste less ribbon. And we're gonna just dovetail the ends of this ribbon here. And once that is done, we'll flip this ribbon over and fluff out all of those little loops. Now for the center of the bow, you could just wrap another piece of ribbon around that piece of pipe cleaner, but instead I'm going to add a little flower, and I got these burlap flowers at the Dollar Tree in little 4-packs, and I'm just gonna hot glue that right to the center. And then again at the Dollar Tree, I found these adorable little acorns, and we're gonna just cut them off of the pick, and I'm gonna hot glue them around the leaf. And once we get those acorns hot glued to our leaf, I'm going to add the ribbon back to the top of the leaf. And since we used that pipe cleaner to wrap up that ribbon, we had a little extra pipe cleaner on the end, and that works out perfect to just attach that to our leaf. And here's the finished product. It turns out great, and I love how it looks on our door. So for this craft, I found this beautiful ceramic tag at the Dollar Tree and a rub-on transfer that I believe was from last year's fall collection, but they still had them at our Dollar Tree. And it said grateful, thankful, and blessed. And I'm just going to go ahead and cut off the little greenery along the bottom because I really just wanted that black and white look. And I'm just going to do the whole rub-on transfer on this tag. And this is perfect for a tiered tray, ladies. And we could just leave it like this. But I decided that I wanted it to be the end of a garland. So I go ahead and grab some twine. And I grabbed my lighter as well, and I just burned a little bit of the fuzz right off of the twine just to clean it up a little bit before I started to string some beads on this. So I do get a lot of my beads from Amazon, and so the larger beads that I am using here were from Amazon, and same with the taupe colored beads. And the white beads, I believe I got at the Dollar Tree with the packages that they have sometimes with just all black or all white. And once I've got my pattern down, I go ahead and I just get everything strung up. I start by tying the one end to the tag. And once that tag is tied up tight, I will go ahead and trim the twine. And I stuff the extra little piece of twine inside that first bead so you can't see it. Next, I'm going to grab some of that ribbon that I love so much. And I did get this ribbon at Walmart if you didn't see that earlier. And I'm just going to tie that at the top there just to finish the tag off and just give it a nice little rustic look. And then what I'm going to do is cut another small piece of the ribbon, and I'm going to use that on the other end of the garland. And we're just going to have that tied there, just a little knot. We're not even going to do a bow or anything. We just want it to be nice and rustic. And to make sure that this stays attached, I'm going to double knot the twine up and around the knot of the ribbon. And this is a simple tag that you can use for your tiered tray or on any sort of shelf decor. To start this craft off, we're going to use these foam balls that I got from the Dollar Tree and some fabric. And for these foam balls, I'm going to go ahead and just slice off about 1/4 of an inch from the bottom of the ball so it'll sit on the shelf nice and flat. Next, I'm going to take my piece of fabric. This fabric I did get from Temu, but you could use any fabric square you want, and it's about a 4x4 inch square. And I'm going to take this fabric and I'm going to clip it corner to corner with one of my pink clips, just so that it's kind of pulled tight. Next, we're going to grab our glue gun, and what we're going to do is we're going to fold the fabric, and we're going to make like little pleats of fabric going all the way around the ball until we make our little pumpkin. Now once we've glued the fabric around the whole entire ball, there will be a little bit of fabric left over. We're not going to worry about that right now. We're going to set the ball aside, and I'm going to grab a bamboo skewer, and I'm going to paint the pointy side with my brown umber apple barrel paint. And we're just going to dry that really nicely. And then we're going to take the skewer and we're going to stick that into the styrofoam at the top of this pumpkin. Next, I'm going to grab my clippers. I'm just going to clip the piece of bamboo, and then I'm going to just touch up the top there with a little bit of paint. And once everything is dry, we're going to go ahead and finish folding down the fabric and gluing it into place. Now to finish this pumpkin off, I'm just going to grab some of my berry garland from the Dollar Tree. And I'm wrapping it around a bamboo skewer to give it a curly queue. And next we just go ahead and add that into our pumpkin. And you're able to take that wire that's in that garland and just kind of stick it into the styrofoam right next to the stem. And if that doesn't work for you, you can just hot glue it. Now I'm going to grab some Spanish moss and just put that around the rim of the stem here. So I add a little bit of hot glue and I just add that Spanish moss all around it. And if there's too much Spanish moss, you can just give it a quick little haircut and make it look the way you'd like it to look. And this cute little pumpkin is ready to put on your tiered tray. And what's great is that this is a very economical craft that you can make a bunch of pumpkins with $1.25 and one piece of fabric. So the Dollar Tree right now has these cute little wood acorns. And so what I'm going to do here is I put the acorn on a paintable surface, and I'm using the light mocha in Apple Barrel. And I found that it was easier to just paint the bottom half with the light mocha, and then I just set it down on the top half and let it dry for a few minutes. And then once that was dry, I went ahead and I used my burnt umber Apple Barrel paint to paint the top part of the acorn. And now I'm going to set that aside to dry, and once everything is dry, I grab a little piece of a petal, and this was a wood flower that I had used in a previous craft, and this one had broke, so I decided to save it in case I needed it for another craft. And it works perfect as a little stem for these acorns. So if you have these little wood flowers from Dollar Tree from the spring, these are perfect to just break apart and make some little wood acorns with them. And then I added a small piece of twine and I made that into a nice little bow, and I just glued that right on top. Now if you don't have that little flower, you can use the garland. And for this garland, I'm not even using the berry portion of it. The berry actually falls off and I don't even use it. I just use the curly Q, and I'm just going to add that to the top of my acorn. After I've attached that with some hot glue, I use a little bit of Spanish moss just to make it look a little prettier. And then I'm going to add another one of those cute bows onto the top of the acorn. Acorns are just so much fun to make. They're perfect little extras to put on your tiered tray. Thank you guys for watching. Please remember, craft more, stress less.